as far as I understand it, Ken, you're one of the first people to have a serious battle with COVID-19 in Minnesota. So if you can go back to March, and as the pandemic was starting, what were you thinking about? And then as you got sick, I'm curious how that all began to transpire.
When it started, it was the beginning of March, and my wife, Rose, and our younger son, we went out to Portland, Oregon, and we needed to, we visited my sister, we visited my niece, then we traveled up the coast to Seattle. And right at that time, they started talking about people getting sick in some of the old folks' homes there. And we guess at that point didn't take it very seriously. By the time midway through our little mini vacation, it started to become a big, important event at the time. And when we returned home, a week after I returned home, I developed these flu-like symptoms, and it got worse throughout that remainder of the week. And by the following week, I was in the hospital and spent 25 days in the hospital, 12 days on a ventilator. I think it was more scary for Rose than it was me, because I was just kind of laying there being a listless glob of goo, I guess. But the things I do remember about this, having a serious fever of 104.5, having the worst headaches that I've ever had before. This was prior to going into the hospital. Rose would call the doctor to see if I could get in, and they said, nope, he's not having trouble breathing. We're not going to admit him into the hospital. This happened for that entire week from, I don't remember the exact dates, but early March, mid-March. That it was a Monday when Rose brought me in at about sunset. I remember it was getting dark. And that's the last thing I remember being in that hospital, was probably giving the guy my identification card to check me into the hospital, because I was having after a week, I was finally having difficulty breathing. And that's when I was admitted.
And this brings us back to the time where, from an outsider's perspective like mine, it seemed like most of the hospitals, they hadn't dealt with it much or at all. So they didn't have tests, or very many, or good ones. So you had the medical professionals, the people that you are entrusting everything with, they're kind of flying by the seat of their pants too.
Exactly.
So I'm curious, at what point in this week long of having some symptoms did you think that you might have had the coronavirus? And what were those first days like? I know you mentioned that they said you didn't have the certain symptoms to come in, but were you pretty aware of what other people have been dealing with through news reports and thought that you had it? Or where were you at in that stage? Do you remember?
I was drastically ill, so I wasn't much help. I'm going to leave it to my wife here to kind of give you that information.
So when he started to get sick, it was more of, had like cold-like symptoms, runny nose, a little bit of cough, slight fever. And really we thought, oh, it's not a big deal. And I would say day 3 of him not feeling well is when the extreme fever, the body aches, the restlessness, he couldn't function really. He was, at that point, we had made sure he was quarantined into our bedroom. Knowing how high his symptoms were, knowing how really almost delusional he was, I was very concerned. I had called hospitals. I called his primary care physician. I called a local clinic. I must have called 3 or 4, actually 5 different places trying to get him in for a test, because I wanted to know if this was for sure the coronavirus, or was he going through something else. We only knew of one other person who had tested positive, but had more symptoms like pneumonia and was in the hospital for a few days and came back home, nothing real serious. So at that point we were like, oh crap, this is real. So yeah, the only time I would go in is to check on him and bring him food, and I would cover my face or whatever. We didn't know. I mean, masking wasn't really talked about yet. We didn't really know how it was transferring. And to be honest with you, when we were on vacation, we were kind of out in the woods and we were hiking and really shut down on social media, didn't really pay attention to what was going on around us. We were enjoying the outdoors. So we didn't realize that everything had really exploded while we were gone. And yeah, kind of scary.
Do you have a sense of when you likely would have been exposed to people that possibly might have spread the virus to you? What was the most likely scenarios?
We think it was probably on the airplane ride home. I noticed a lady that she did have not an N95 mask, but the little blue mask.
Disposable cloth mask.
Disposable cloth mask, and the whole time we were flying home, she was coughing nonstop. And I'm assuming that was a symptom at the time. I developed kind of the same cough that she had several days later, which in turn led to me being hospitalized.
Okay, so we'll never know for sure if it was her, but
not really.
Then she might have been very sick, and there might have been other people on the plane. Because
yes,
I'm sure
there was no testing of the contact tracing. There was none of that at all.
This is the early days of everything becoming just enough knowledge for us to have a chance at maybe knowing what's going on, but not enough to know what's going on.
Right.